Hey everybody, welcome back to SEC Roundup. I am Nick Morgan, the co-founder of ICANN, Investor Choice Advocates Network, and the co-host of today's episode. I am joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Tom Zaccaro. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm going to be doing a lot better after we hear from Jan and Adrienna. They are joining us today from the Brattle Group, which is an economic consulting firm providing expert analysis in complex legal, regulatory, and policy matters. We'll start with you, Jan. Dr. Jindra is a principal at Brattle, assistant director and financial economist previously in his career at the SEC. Dr. Jindra, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we're also joined by Dr. Adrienna Huffman, who is a senior consultant at Brattle, and among many other things, previously served as a visiting scholar and financial economist at the SEC. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
So we're getting together because you all put out a fantastic report analyzing the state of SEC enforcement matters. So we want to hear all about that. But before we get into your report and some additional information that you are about to put out in a report, Tom, can you give us an overview? I mean, 2025 has been a pretty remarkable year in terms of the difference between enforcement results in 2025 versus 2024. And maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview before we jump in and ask the Brattle folks for more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone was wondering how the enforcement division would change this year, given obviously a new administration, the new chairman, Chairman Atkins, and the significant staff reductions that the commission experienced at the beginning of the year. I think we all expected enforcement activity to decline, particularly in this first year of his chairmanship. But when I read Jean and Adrienna's report, I was astonished at how much it has decreased from past chairs, and particularly from the first year of those chairmanships. So I think we should turn it over to Jan and Adrienna and have them talk about what they've observed in enforcement activity in the first year of, well, I guess the first 9 months of Chairman Atkins' tenure. So with that, Jean, Adrienna, maybe you can talk about the methodology you used to prepare your report and what your conclusions you reached.
Yeah, so I'll start with the methodology, and then maybe Jan can do some of the takeaways. So essentially what we did is we scraped the Division of Enforcement's website for their disclosures on administrative proceedings, litigation releases, and also press releases. And for fiscal year 2025, we analyzed that combination of data. For our fiscal year 2018 through fiscal year 2024 data, we relied upon the Division of Enforcement's annual reports, which had been publicly released typically within November to December of those calendar years. And so our analysis for fiscal year 2025 will provide sort of a preview of what we may be able to anticipate when the Division of Enforcement discloses their annual report for fiscal year 2025, if they do so this year.
And what Adrienna is referring to is our soon-to-be published fiscal year 25 summary of the SEC initial case filings. And I think, Tom, what you have referred to was our prior publication that actually looked at another indicator of how busy the SEC is, which is just pure count of the litigation releases and administrative proceeding releases. The good news that we as economists take comfort in is that both approaches provide or lead us to the same conclusion, which is there is a slowdown in enforcement activity by the SEC. While to some extent this slowdown is to be expected around times when new chairs are sworn in, the decline that we have observed in fiscal year 2025 is really unprecedented, and it's specifically due to this dramatic decline in initial case filings in the second half of the fiscal year. And just to throw some numbers, in the first half of the fiscal year, we have about 362 initial case filings. So this goes through end of March of 2025. In the second half of fiscal year 2025, we have a total of 144 initial case filings, which is very unusual based on the historical data.
And
Yeah.
the other data point I would add is that typically we observe a large spike in enforcement actions disclosed in the month of September, which corresponds to the SEC's fiscal year end. And while we do see a rise for fiscal year 25 in the month of September, it is far, far lower than historical averages calculated over that 2018 to 24 period. So again, to put some numbers, we only saw 47 new actions disclosed in September of 2025 versus a historical average that exceeded 200 disclosures.
So I have a request when you do your year-end numbers, and maybe you already are aware of this. We talked a little bit about this before we got on, but I can imagine when you've got such an abrupt shift in policy from one commission to another, from, say, Chair Gensler to Chair Atkins, there could have been a lot of cases in the pipeline using theories that were approved under the prior administration that are not approved under the current administration. For example, crypto cases represented a large percentage of the prior numbers for prior years. If there were dozens and dozens of more crypto cases in the pipeline, by definition, those aren't going to be brought in 2025. The same would be true for the off-channel communications cases, which accounted for a large number of the Gensler era commission cases. So I wonder if you have any insights or will have any insights as to one possible cause for the reduction in numbers being attributable to cases that were in the pipeline pursuing theories that this commission believes to be inappropriate.
So unfortunately for that, you would really need somebody from the SEC to be able to answer that question unambiguously. And by the way, one case study that I would add to your list is insider trading, and they call these types shadow trading, shadow insider trading. I believe there was a SEC won a case in 2024 against Mr. Panuat, got a conviction on shadow insider trading where he was not trading in the stock of his company, but of the competitor. I was expecting, and I was refreshing the litigation release website every other day. There's no other cases forthcoming like that, despite the win on the case. So I expect, and many observers in the market expect, that there's going to be a return to basics, protection of investors, and trying to return money to the harmed investors. And there's going to be less of an emphasis on, and I'm really guessing this is my expectation, I have no insight into what SEC is thinking, but there's going to be less emphasis on high penalties for non-individual entities.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. The director of the Division of Enforcement's only been on for a month or two. Do you have any insights as to whether this trend will continue or whether the new enforcement director might batten down the hatches and get people hard at work again? We also have to acknowledge that as of today, October 17th, the government is shut down. And I believe there are only 400 employees working in the commission-wide. So I don't think we obviously won't see a change in the near future.
There's a really, really old joke. Economists spend half of their time making predictions and half of the time explaining why the predictions didn't pan out. So I want to be super careful here. Okay. So absent what we expect based on the data that we have seen through the end of fiscal year 25, absent a dramatic shock, and what I mean is some large asset price declines due to some systemic fraud taking place in the marketplace, we would expect that the number of enforcement actions will continue to be well below the historical averages. It's going to be even below what we have observed for the fiscal year 25 figures, which is about 506 initial case filings. We expect more actions against individual respondents. There is probably going to be, and this is what we see in the 25 data in the second half, is many more initial case filings involve allegations of criminal nature. So DOJ is filing parallel actions together with the SEC. And we would expect, and this is really something that we would like to do with Adrienna more, is we expect fewer and lower penalties. But we do expect an increased focus on returning money to investors. So there's going to be continued focus on distribution of ill-gotten gains to investors.
Yeah.
And I would also say, I think in part what could be contributing to this trend of lower enforcement actions, like under Atkins, is this, and we're seeing this in some of our clients. I don't know if Tom and Nick, you are as well, but this sort of greater use of cooperation, remediation, and self-reporting incentives. So I think that allows resolution of cases without a full formal enforcement. And, that's going to reduce the number of cases that are litigated.
Yeah. I mean, I think your predictions that this trend will continue are probably accurate, right? Because we know Republican administrations tend to be more pro-business. I think this administration is going to be more, will be harder on SEC enforcement in terms of not pursuing as many cases as prior administrations have. I think the shutdown is going to have a big impact. I think the reduction in the staff, which I don't see a turnaround for. I don't see staff increasing back to even what it was at the beginning of this year. All are going to have an adverse effect on enforcement for the foreseeable future. Probably all of fiscal 26.
And I think picking up on that point, Tom, and a point Jan made about the Panawatch shadow insider trading case, like a difference in philosophy between the two, the Gensler administration and the Atkins administration, that Panawatch case is still pending in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So you could take two different approaches to the fact that shadow insider trading theory is still being litigated. You could forge ahead and bring a dozen more shadow insider trading cases, or you could wait for that appeal to be resolved, see what the law says, and then determine whether you should proceed with other cases. I think there may be some of that going on here too. Like let's get the law settled first before plowing ahead and bringing more cases. So
that makes perfect sense. Thank you for bringing it up. I was actually thinking, there's often a discussion, is the current administration pro-business or not? Or in the past, was it different? And I think the SEC has kind of a unique role of being where I see myself as I'm pro-market. I am in favor of any report and any enforcement action that makes the market fair, it makes capital formation possible, and protects investors. So that's what I'm going to be watching for in the future.
great.
I think that's great. I also probably think we're going to see less, regulation by enforcement. I suspect the commission is not going to be doing what they've done in prior years, where they're making policy through enforcement actions.
Yeah, that may be something to look at too in terms of the overall numbers. One instance of regulation by enforcement in the prior administration was bringing enforcement actions to expand the definition of securities dealer. There were a number of those cases, all of which have now been dropped by the current administration. So it may be the case that, for example, on that particular issue, there will be rulemaking first, enforcement actions later. That could get to the same endpoint potentially, but rather than doing it through enforcement, doing it through rulemaking, which you'd see, the end result might be the same in a policy sense, but you would see a drop in the enforcement cases. So I think you're right, Tom. If the abandonment of regulation by enforcement could also be another cause for the drop in numbers.
Well, this is terrific.
Yeah, thank you all for your report. We'll look for your next report when it comes out and on the fiscal year numbers. Always good to hear from you. And so we thank you all. Thank you both for joining. Tom, thank you for co-hosting as usual. For everyone else, please see more information about ICANN at icanlaw.org, and we'll see you on the next SEC Roundup. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.